A listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the latest gender pay gap report has been released today, and while it is decreasing, the progress is still too slow. The gap still stands at more than 20%, with the new report showing greater discrimination at the CEO level. We'll unpack all the latest findings in just a moment and what to do if you think you're not being paid fairly. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 27th of November. After weeks of speculation, Barnaby Joyce has officially announced his resignation from the Nationals after 30 years. The former Deputy Prime Minister made the announcement in Parliament this afternoon.
I announced this about 5 weeks ago. Apart from a 90-second phone conversation with the leader, I've had no communication with either the leader of the National Party or the Deputy Leader of the National Party to try and resolve this, and that's disappointing.
Mr Joyce held a news conference afterwards saying he is weighing up all opportunities and considering joining One Nation. The announcement follows a dinner meeting with Pauline Hanson earlier this week about defecting to One Nation. The United States has stopped processing all immigration requests from Afghan nationals effective immediately after a shooting in Washington, D.C. earlier today. Authorities say the new measures come into force pending further review of security and vetting protocols. 2 National Guard members are in a critical condition in hospital after being shot just 2 blocks from the White House. In a special address to the nation, US President Donald Trump condemned the shooting as an act of hatred and terror against America. President Trump saying the suspect is believed to be from Afghanistan.
This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. The hearts of all Americans tonight are with those 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard and their families.
3 men have been arrested over the horrific inferno that has engulfed a number of high-rise apartments in Hong Kong. At least 44 people have been killed, 60 others injured, and almost 300 others are still unaccounted for. It's understood many of the residents did not realise the towers were on fire until it was too late to leave, as many windows were boarded up because of recent renovations. Derek Armstrong-Chan from Hong Kong's Fire Services Department says the fire was so intense it made firefighting and rescue efforts almost impossible.
Besides, the temperature inside the buildings concerned are very high. So it's quite difficult for us to enter the building and go upstairs to conduct firefighting and rescue operation.
Police allege the construction company is responsible for the incident, with the 3 men arrested on suspicion of manslaughter due to gross negligence. And investigations are continuing after a woman was killed and a man critically injured in a shark attack at an isolated beach on the New South Wales Mid North Coast. Emergency services were called around 6:30 this morning to the beach south of Port Macquarie. The woman, believed to be in her mid-20s, passed away at the scene. The man, also in his 20s, was airlifted to hospital suffering a serious leg injury. Authorities praising quick-thinking witnesses who applied a tourniquet to the injured man before paramedics arrived. Here is New South Wales Ambulance Superintendent Josh Smythe.
Courage from some bystanders is amazing, and in this situation, it's to put yourself out there is very heroic, and obviously did give us time to get to that male patient.
Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the latest gender gap report with CEO of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, Mary Woolridge. While there is some good news, there is still a long way to go. Mary unpacks all the latest data and explains why pay equity is beneficial for us all. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. We are fascinated by the findings from this gender pay gap report. What have you found?
It is a really exciting time when we release the annual results from the reporting that more than 8,000 employers do to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And very positively, the gender pay gap is still coming down, and it's coming down at a positive rate, above trend over the last 5 years. Interestingly, this has come from all employers. It's not one particular industry or one particular area. It is due to widespread action on lots of fronts across many industries by many employers. And that's the momentum we want to see, that we're accelerating change and that this is happening broadly across the economy, not just in a narrow area. So, really positive news in terms of making good progress. There is still, of course, on average, a differential of about $28,000 a year between what women and men earn. And, we need to keep working on it. There's still a significant gap there, but we're heading in the right direction.
Mary, in regards to where you got the information from, what businesses did you survey or investigate to get this data?
So there's a requirement under the Workplace Gender Equality Act that every employer in Australia who has 100 or more employees reports to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, to WGEA, every year. And so we're able to not only see a snapshot for this year, but we have been collecting this data for 10 years, so we can also see the progress over time. We really recognise that's a significant commitment of employers to do that. But what it means is we're collecting information from more than 8,000 employers, covering about 5 million Australian employees. So it's a very significant census of the employers in Australia who are in medium and large businesses.
Mary, you mentioned before we are making important, steps forward in reducing the gender pay gap, but it's still at over 20% for exactly the same person doing exactly the same job. Why is that still happening in 2025, and what are the key barriers?
So it is a bit broader than that. And it's important to say that this is more than equal pay for equal work. Now, that's been the law, that you can't pay people differently for doing the same job, and that's been in place for about 50 years. That is a subset of these numbers, but it is also a broader calculation because it is on average what women and men earn in an employer, in an industry, or across the nation. So it also takes into account differences that we have many women working in what we call feminised industries that tend to be lower paid, such as healthcare and social assistance, and many men working in male-dominated industries like mining and construction, which tend to be higher paid. So it reflects the structure of our workforce as well as the roles and occupations that people fulfil within it. And the other thing that's important to note is we actually look at total remuneration. We don't just look at base salary, so we look at things like overtime and just bonus payments, superannuation, all of those sorts of things as well. So when you look at what on average men and women are paid, that differential is 21.1%, which is the number that we've released today.
Mary, in regards to the breakdown with this report card, it's interesting to note that women in managerial positions, especially CEOs, earn $83,000 less on average than men in base salary every year. And you just mentioned it then, when super bonuses and overtime are included, the difference is actually $185,000. Why is there still such a gap?
It's incredible, isn't it? So, and we do see this as you get more senior, there's fewer women in those roles, but the gender pay gap within those manager roles gets higher as well. So when you take the CEO, leaders of organisations, medium and large, comparable challenges, presumably, in terms of managing their workforces, delivering on the outcomes, making a profit if that's their objective, whatever it might be. And there's still this massive differential. So only just over 20% of the CEOs are women. So it's a smaller cohort anyway. But on average, there's a gender pay gap of over 26%. So some of this reflects the fact that more CEOs are in those lower paying industries like healthcare and social assistance. And we do see, some very high paid, often men in, some of the listed companies and some of the more masculine industries. Once again, construction and mining are good examples. But it is, I think, an important reflection of, even at the most senior levels, there's a discrepancy in how women and men experience the workplace and how it's reflected, their values reflected in their pay.
Mary, you mentioned earlier it is illegal to pay people differently if they're doing exactly the same job, but there are many examples in many workplaces, even quite high-profile positions where there's been a male in that position and quite clearly the female is paid differently, although they are doing exactly the same job. If you are in that situation, what should you do with your employer?
Yeah, there's a number of things that can be done. I think there is value. And one of the good things is in the last couple of years, it's no longer legal to stop people talking about what they earn. So there's been an enhancement on pay transparency in the workplace. You used to be able to employers could say in their contracts that you can't talk about it or just not allow it at all. So we can have those conversations. I think it's always, great if you can have those conversations with your manager, with HR, have, mechanisms to engage and perhaps understand why the differential might be in place or if there's no justification to engage in how it might be reflected in your pay so that it is fair and comparable. And then, of course, there's the Fair Work Commission. So there is an external mechanism and the Fair Work Ombudsman, for employees to raise those concerns externally if their conversations internally are not being satisfactorily managed.
Your report also looked at the breakdown in boards in Australia. Tell us what your report found on that, because that's really fascinating.
We are seeing improvement on the number of boards that are gender balanced. And for that, we look at a 40-40-20, 40%, at least 40% women, at least 40% men, and then 20% of any gender. A slow improvement on that front, but incredibly still, nearly a quarter of all boards have no women, which always is really amazing in this day and age. And in an industry like the construction industry, in fact, more than 50% of their boards have no women on them, and reflecting, once again, some of those really strong gender stereotypes with some of our industries that we have. Boards play such a critical role, not only in sort of creating an authorising environment that the employer is fair and equal in terms of how they deal with their employees. They have really important oversight now in relation to the requirement under the positive duty for employers to provide a safe workplace, and directors have liabilities in that regard. So there are so many important roles that boards play, and the evidence shows that more balanced boards actually lead to better equality outcomes within the employer themselves. So we've got to continue the momentum that we have to ensure that boards are gender balanced. They do have a diversity of views around the table so that they can make better decisions, and that can lead and impact on the organisation as a whole.
Mary, why isn't there more diversity on boards?
Good question. And this is across the board, and we hear lots of different reasons. I think one reason regularly used that is now no longer really at the table, which is, we can't find women to do those roles. There are amazingly capable women who are fulfilling director roles currently, who are in senior executive roles, who could also contribute at a director level. So it's not through lack of talent. Sometimes it's a lack of will. One thing we look at, for example, is whether there's a tenure on the board. So does the board actually have a turnover that enables new people and a greater diversity of people to be appointed to those roles? Because there is a link between boards who have limited tenures and having more balance. So, sometimes it's inertia. And what's important for directors to understand is having that diversity of views around the board table is fundamental and linked to the effectiveness of the business that they're governing, and a really important outcome that should be pursued.
And Mary, silver lining here, this is fantastic news. Your report also found a growing number of men are actually taking up the opportunity to take parental leave. Were you surprised by that? I mean, that's a great step in the right direction.
It's so important. And one of the critical things we've got to do is make sure we break down these very heavily gendered norms that we have about, what does a leader look like? What does a worker look like? What does a carer look like? Because we do have very strong perspectives and stereotypes and norms around those roles. And breaking down that idea of that, women are the carers and men are the workers is so important to improving fairness and equality at work. So one of the ways we measure it is the uptake of primary carers leave. And as you've said, now 20% of primary carers leave is taken by men. That's up from 17% last year and 14% the year before. So it's a low base, but we're getting really positive growth in terms of that perspective. And I think it's also reflective of this generation of parents. I think they have an expectation of more equality in terms of those roles. And we know it's better for men's well-being and their engagement with their families. The evidence shows that when men take parental leave, that relationship with their children and their contribution to the caring responsibilities continues well after the period of time when they're taking the leave. It actually, fundamentally shifts the dynamic in the household into the future as well, which is really important. And what that then creates is opportunities for women to return to work or do some part-time work, to engage, back in the workforce, rather than having necessarily extended time out of the workforce, which we know has pretty dramatic ramifications for them and their, financial and career positions going forward. So good trend, good numbers, still low. We want it to be higher. And we need to break down these norms and have that equality both in unpaid work as well as in work.
And it's beneficial for all involved. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thanks very much, Natasha. And it's absolutely right. It's so important that we realise that equality at work benefits men, women, everyone in the workplace. And it's absolutely fundamental to make sure that work can be fair, equal and safe for everyone each and every day.
That was Mary Woolridge, the CEO of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.